Good afternoon, everyone. If everybody could please come in and take their seats, we're going to get started soon. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. You are at the session titled Mulesoft and MarkLogic, Making Simplified Data Integration Even Faster. I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping items and then turn it over to Enrique, who's going to introduce the speakers. First off, if you haven't already done so, please download the app. Hope you've done it by now. In the event session, you'll find a survey link. Please complete the survey. It's very valuable to us. It's valuable to the speakers. There's also an incentive, a $250 Amazon gift card you could win by filling it out, and we donate money to a charity. Secondly, please mute your phones right now out of respect for the speakers. Please go ahead and do that. And then lastly, questions and answers. We'll do questions at the end of the session. We'll leave about 10 minutes or so for questions. If for some reason we don't get your question addressed, you can find the speakers afterwards, and I'm sure they will be happy to answer any of your questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Enrique.
Thank you, Ed. My name is Enrique Alonso. I manage global technology alliances for MarkLogic, and I'm delighted here to present this particular session with our strategic partner, Mulesoft. Over the last few days, you've obviously been hearing a lot about MarkLogic and the MarkLogic Data Hub, and how do we simplify the integration of data silos for our customers. In the context of Mulesoft, the question is, how does Mulesoft fit in that particular picture? If you could, go to the next slide there. So, have you seen this diagram before? If you think about the ingestion problem, well, ingestion is all about going out to data sources and quickly extracting that information and making it available for Data Hub to do all the beautiful stuff that we do within the MarkLogic Data Hub. Mulesoft gives us tremendous speed in accessing that data because they have a library of connectors that are readily available in their Mulesoft Exchange to a very broad range of business applications or data sources. So they really accelerate the process of getting data to the MarkLogic Data Hub. On the right-hand side, we have consumption of that data. So in the future, Mulesoft is an API management company, the leader in that space. And they will allow us to, using an API-based, API-first approach, to develop applications on top of MarkLogic. So it's obviously very strategic for us. Let me quickly introduce some of the participants. We went through the first slide without that, but maybe we'll go back. Thank you. So we got Joey Khalid, who's Director of Business Development for Mulesoft, my counterpart there, who will be starting the session with a description of the Mulesoft platform. We have Vishnu Samavedula. I get that. I get points for that. And Vishnu is a solution architect in Mulesoft, and he'll provide a more of a demonstration description of their platform. And then we have Clay Redden from MarkLogic, who will describe the connector that MarkLogic developed and that's certified within the Mulesoft Exchange, and we'll give some demonstrations on that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joey.
Thanks, Enrique. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long conference, but hopefully you've learned a lot. We're thrilled to be here, so I just want to begin by saying thank you to Enrique, to Gary Bloom, to Dave Ponzini, and the entire MarkLogic management team. It's such a pleasure to be back in DC. I went to a coffee shop this morning because the Wi-Fi in the hotel wasn't working, as you heard from Joe. So I went to the counter and I said, what's the Wi-Fi password? And he said, you have to buy a drink first. And I said, I already had coffee this morning. I don't need more coffee. But I said, okay, what do you recommend? So he said, we make a really good dirty chai. So I said, all right, I'll get a dirty chai. I don't need the caffeine, but here you go. Here's my credit card. What's the Wi-Fi password? And so he said, you have to buy a drink first. All lowercase, no spaces. And that's why I don't have a Netflix special. I'm Joey Khalid. I'm a director of business development at Mulesoft. I'm so happy to be here with Vishnu, my colleague. Thank you for your time today. I want to tell you a little bit about Mulesoft first. I'm sure many of you have heard about it at the conference, but just to give you a high-level overview, Mulesoft provides a software platform to create an application network of data, devices, and of applications, data, and devices using APIs. So that sounds really nice, but what does that mean? What are we all about? So Mulesoft's vision is really to make it easier for organizations to change and innovate faster. We're really trying to change the clock speed at which enterprises do their business. And I'm really excited to tell you how we plan to do that and how we are doing that. The thing that makes me really happy and really excited to go to work every day is the customers that we're working with. And you might recognize some of these logos. They're some of the largest, most impressive companies, and they're really what gets us all out of bed and excited about what we do on a day-to-day basis. You'll see Netflix and Coca-Cola and McDonald's. McDonald's is one of my favorites because they're building their entire ordering system on the Mulesoft platform. So when you go and buy an Egg McMuffin in the morning at a kiosk, you'll know that that's running on Mulesoft. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that's happening. The exciting thing about Mulesoft is that the company has been growing really fast, and part of growth is you start to attract a lot of attention. So we started off as an independent company, and in 2018, we were acquired by Salesforce. And so now Mulesoft and Salesforce are one company. And so we have kind of a whole suite of solutions today that are not only integration, but also sales, marketing, application development, platform, analytics, AI and machine learning. There's kind of a whole suite of solutions that Salesforce offers, and really Mulesoft is just one piece of that, which is the integration layer. So the $10 million question, which is what problem are we solving today? I'm sure all of you are familiar with this challenge. Data and devices are increasingly distributed around the world. There's a convergence of forces that are happening today, whether it's big data or IoT or microservices, and it's getting really hard to bring all of this information together. So historically, the way this problem got solved was through something called point-to-point integration. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. You string together systems using Java code, you're writing point-to-point integrations, and you end up with something that looks like a total mess. It looks like spaghetti code. This picture is what we all try to avoid. It's brittle, it's fragile, it breaks, it's expensive, it's time-consuming, and it drives developers nuts. So this is the problem that Mulesoft is trying to solve. So how does Mulesoft solve this problem? So it all starts with the API. The API is really at the heart of what Mulesoft is doing. And if you take away just one thing from this presentation, if someone asks you, what is Mulesoft? It's an integration platform and API lifecycle management platform. And it really starts by designing and building APIs on top of systems of record. So we give you all of the tooling necessary to design, build, deploy, manage, apply governance, and deprecate, if needed, APIs on top of systems of record. And really, the API becomes a standard way to amplify your customer journey. So you are able to design and apply security policies down to the API level. So there's no risk or security breaches or anything like that, because from the very start of the API design process, you're building everything on top of Mulesoft. And these APIs can be moved across environments without any redevelopment work. The main advantage of these APIs are that they become reusable assets that other parts of your organization can then use to do future integration projects. And so this is really the approach that has made Mulesoft's customers so successful. and we call it API-led connectivity. And it really starts at this bottom layer right here. These are the core systems of record that you start by putting an API on top of all of those core systems of record. We call that first layer system APIs. Now, typically, our customers will want to do some kind of data orchestration or manipulation on top of those system APIs, and so they'll build another layer on top of it, which is called a process API. So this can be something like a shopping cart API or a payment API, and really what that allows you to do is eliminate all the complexity of the downstream systems and only focus on connecting to that process API layer. You don't have to worry about provisioning access to core systems of record. You don't have to think about Java code. You're literally just writing to a modern RESTful API that's built on the Mule platform. And last but not least, there's the Experience API, which is really a simple reusable asset that allows your front-end developers to only work with one type of API without having to worry about everything that sits underneath. So this three-tiered approach makes it really fast and really simple to develop applications without worrying about anything underneath. And this is API-led connectivity right here. Our customers tell us that before API-led connectivity, something that would take them 6 months to do themselves can now happen in as little as 6 weeks. And that's how we're really changing the clock speed of business. And so one of the core tenets of MuleSoft is reuse. So we're trying to make it really easy for customers to avoid reinventing the wheel, rewriting code. And so the way we solve this problem is by building an app store. And we call it the Anypoint Exchange. And the Anypoint Exchange is where we are proud to announce today the new MarkLogic Connector, which we're about to show you a demo for. So think of this as really like a repository where you can grab assets that are already built, put them into a workflow, and get an integration project running really quickly. And so the whole point of this is to create a consumer type of experience for APIs. So we're trying to push the integration effort further and further away from central IT and empowering the rest of the organization to build applications and to do this type of work. And so the end goal and the end vision, if MuleSoft is successful, is something called an application network. And really what it is the way I think about it is it's kind of like the social graph in your personal lives. It provides a single point of view into all of the data that an enterprise is creating, which allows you to see literally all the analytics, all the security, all the error handling, all the logging of the data flowing through your enterprise. It's like a single point of view of all of your information in one place, all running on the Mule infrastructure. So in summary, as I mentioned earlier, when you think about MuleSoft, think about integration platform, API management capabilities, and a very easy-to-use asset library. And that's the Anypoint Exchange. And we're trying to make it really easy to do integration projects for all types of personas, not just central IT. And so now, Vishnu will talk a little bit about how Mulesoft and MarkLogic are working better together with the partnership that we just announced.
Thanks, Joey. So now that you guys have heard who we are, what are the integration challenges that we solve, how we approach it through the API-led connectivity, and you must have heard that even yesterday, it's quite resonant with MarkLogic. It's API first. So we're quite excited as to how we're going to solve great use cases with our MuleSoft product stack. So I'm going to quickly give you a quick crash course as to what our architecture today looks like. So if you look at it, to solve any integration issue or to create an API, MuleSoft basically supports an end-to-end lifecycle for an API. You want to design it, add the implementation to it, secure it, manage it, and deploy it. And you want to have some sort of easy connectivity so that you're not writing custom code to each different systems. So if you look at here, we have the design section, the manage, and the scale, and different deployment options. The most important piece, what I like to call the magic sauce of our platform, is the run Mule. It's called the Mule runtime engine that supports all these great functionalities to support. So with that, you basically have an option of like an offline-based tool like Studio to create integrations. Or once you are done with creating an integration, you can secure it by adding out-of-the-box policies or custom policies. And once you're done creating the integrations you want to deploy it, you have an option of either deploying it on the Mulesoft cloud or on-premise or on other deployment options too. So now that you have a good idea as to what the product stack looks like, I'll switch to the next one that we're going to cover today is the Studio. So Studio, if you look at the UI, it's quite familiar if you have used Eclipse before. It's an Eclipse-based tool. And it gives a very good developer experience when you're creating integrations and flows. I'll quickly switch to the application, but if you look at the UI, if you see these big boxes, we call them the flows. So we do all the orchestration within the flows or in between different flows. And these blue icons that you see are called connectors. So connectors could be system-based connectors, like how Joey mentioned, all those system APIs that we have from the Exchange, or they could be inbuilt connectors by Mulesoft themselves, either for data transformation, for batch processing, or things like talking to a message broker. So we have a whole list of connectivity using the Studio. So without spending more time on this, I'll try to quickly switch to Studio and show you what it looks like. So I'll just create a new project here. Is that OK, right? OK. Yeah, let's do a new project here.
It's not coming up on the screen.
It's not sharing on the screen. 1 minute. Can we share the other app? The Studio application that you want to share. Okay. 1 second. Sorry, guys, give us a minute. For some reason, it's not showing up here.
There we go.
Does it show now?
Yep.
OK, great. So this is what Studio looks like. So when you go first time to create a very simple use case, if this is the UI of the Studio, you go with simply creating a new project here. You can name it as test project. And here in the first section, you have different options. It shows you what the runtime is. So if you see, it says 4.2.0. So there are a lot of customers who are probably using previous versions of runtime. So there could be use cases where there are multiple runtimes running, and you would choose what runtime you want to use. So 4.2.0 being the latest, the greatest, we'll use it. And Studio comes with its own inbuilt runtime itself. So whatever applications you're developing within this UI, you're running in your own local machine. The next option here, you see API implementation. So if you remember the whole architecture where the design part is there, we also support creating API specifications also. So even before creating integration, you can create an API specification that acts like a scaffolding on top of your app. So I'll quickly go hit finish. And here on your right-hand side, we call it the Mule palette. This is basically an abstraction of the Anypoint exchange, which you have access to all the system-based connectors that is out there. So you have access to the public exchange, and also if as a team you're creating some local or in-house integrations, you can access it using the exchange activity. So if you go to the add module section, you'll see all the possible ways of adding different systems. You have Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, and a lot of system-based connectivity here. So a quick example, like for example, have Amazon S3. I'll basically go ahead, Salesforce also. So you can pretty much expand your palette here for the systems that you need. And you can add MarkLogic Connector also in the same way from the exchange. So in order to create a very simple API, like say, for example, I want to do a get data. So you would start with adding like an endpoint name, which is through an HTTP listener connector. You basically say get data. Now, once you do that, you want a system where you want to get the data from. Say, for example, I want to use Salesforce. Now, the great thing is when you click Salesforce, you have all these options right next to it. And this is true for any connector. With the MarkLogic connector and other connectors that we have, each system will have multiple functionalities. So I would simply use something like a query function. So in this case, I'll just pull a random method like query. And now once you're using Salesforce, the good thing is you're not writing any code here. You're pretty much just adding the connection information, and you're good to go. You can write your Salesforce query, or the system that you're accessing, just you can add the query here, and you get the data from there. Now, if you want to send this data into a different system, the important part is different systems have different data formats. How do you try to consolidate or reconcile those data formats? For that, you use something called a transform. So transform is basically a data transformation connector, where you basically have all the metadata coming from the connector laid out, and you can write a simple transformation as to what column name or field names you need. So in this case, for example, if my source system needs like a JSON output as a JSON input and the output from Salesforce to Java, you can simply write JSON and add something called payload. This basically means I'm querying Salesforce, I'm getting a bunch of records, but I want to view it as a JSON output. And you can specify any output that you need. If you want a CSV, XML, or JSON, it's totally your call. Now that it's done, I have my information. I want to save it in S3. So I'll simply go here. Oops. And you can add like a source system like Amazon or any other local database. So a very simple use case is that you created an endpoint called getData. You're querying Salesforce. You're transforming it and adding it into a destination system. So you can create really complex use cases. This was like a very simple one. And you can also do more complexities. If you look at the core functionalities, you have options of doing batch or like a for each option. So if you have large number of records, you don't want to be querying them record by record because it'll end up becoming slow. So you want to do like a batch to make it more faster. So you have lots of flexibility as to how you want to create the integration. The amazing part here is using MuleSoft, you're not only abstracting those system APIs, but you're also able to create all those orchestration and the transformation before itself, so everything works automatically. It's going here. So now that I've seen how the studio works, this is what the MarkLogic connector is. So this is called a connector page. So MarkLogic has an app on our Anypoint exchange. You can add the documentation for what the connector does, add your own documentation links, and also you can simply go hit download and it's free to use. You just need to have Studio and you need to have your MarkLogic instance. You add the connection details and it's good to go. And you can create more connectors like this by simply getting in touch with us through our isv@mulesoft.com, and we can help you certify those connectors and host it on our public exchange. So just to paint this picture, in the last section, so if you think about MuleSoft and MarkLogic's Data Hub, we basically help both in the entry and the exit points. So MarkLogic would need data from different data sources. They could use MuleSoft to get data from different sources, transform it, standardize it, and use it as an ingestion input for the Data Hub. And once that is done, at the exit point, if you want to trigger some downstream process, like saving the output of the file in Amazon or trying to write into a file or kick off some other process, you can use MuleSoft for that. Because everything is based on APIs, you're able to trigger process at every point. So in a nutshell, I hope you had you understood like how MuleSoft works. Let us know if you have more questions. For next step, I'll pass it on to Clay, who will show us a great demo.
Hey, Joey, can I use the, yeah, thanks. Okay. Thank you, Vishnu, for the great demonstration and introduction into Anypoint Studio. So as Enrique mentioned in his intro, really the value that working within the Mulesoft ecosystem brings us is really this vast array of connectors they have. It's really kind of mind-boggling how much you can connect to when you get out on the exchange and see what all they have. And this is really key to our mission of simplifying data integration to leverage the power of the Data Hub platform. And also, to Joey's point, by using this pattern that Mulesoft gives us, it really minimizes the need to write the custom point-to-point code, the spaghetti code integration that Joey showed. It really gives us a simple pattern of connectors and flows that, from a MarkLogic perspective, we have one target. We can write to our Mulesoft connector, and other connectors downstream can pick up from us, read to us, what have you. So a little bit about the connector. All of Mulesoft's connectors, their SDK to write connectors is all Java-based. I've been getting some questions throughout the last couple of days about, well, how does this connector work? How did you develop it? Do I have to know XQuery, all this stuff? That answer is no. So they're all Java-based, they're SDK, and so accordingly, we use the Java Client API, the MarkLogic Java Client API. And it works really pretty seamlessly also with Data Movement SDK. So a lot of the approaches that if you've used Data Movement SDK or even just MLCP or Gradle to do Data Hub framework sorts of ingests and harmonizations, it pretty much works the exact same way. So we've designed the connector very much around that, and using the same sorts of inputs and parameters that MarkLogic Content Pump uses. As was mentioned, we now have version 1.0.0, that's hard to say, out of the Mulesoft Anypoint Exchange. There's the link. They provided the nice visualization. You can Google it. It's real easy to get to. And also, if you want to check out anything that we're doing with the current development, what's in process right now, the project is out on GitHub. It's on the community GitHub. So the development itself is open source. Hope you can follow that. So what's in 1.0.0? So it was our initial release, and quite frankly, first goal was to just get data into MarkLogic. So that's exactly what we're doing. There's an operation when you have a connector that has components called operations. So our first operations are import docs, and that's for writing any of the types of documents you would normally put into MarkLogic: JSON, XML, text, or binary. There's also an operation called getJobReport, which is just simply getting back a job report from DMSDK to let you know the status of how your import jobs operation went to know a success or error condition. And then the initial release, we were only supporting kind of the built-ins that MarkLogic had in terms of digest and basic authentication. No SSL in 1.0.0 just yet. However, our next release, 1.1.0, which we hopefully will get out this month. It is in the Mulesoft certification queue pipeline right now. So hopefully we'll get that certified here before the end of the month. In this release, a lot more functionality. So you're going to get the ability to query the database. So you'll be able to query docs, gather docs up to send downstream for other Mule flow processes. You'll be able to delete docs. Both of those work by the use of either structured query or CTS queries, if you are used to working with those in MarkLogic. We added functionality to import docs to support the use of temporal collections, for those of you who do bitemporal applications, and we added support for two-way SSL and certificate authentication. And we're currently planning 1.2.0, or it could also go to 2.0.0, depending on your ideas. So we know that kind of central to where we want to take the rest of the development here is entirely geared towards the data hub. And so some of what I'll show you today is going to be entirely geared on orchestration with DHF. But our efforts here would actually be towards getting it into fewer steps, more of an operator sort of paradigm. Adding support for custom REST resource extensions and the ability to also invoke server-side queries. So if you have queries already stored server-side that you want to invoke and get results back, that would be there as well. And last but not least, very important, support for RDF and semantics, able to input, export, do Sparkle queries, what have you. So now we're going to run through a simple demo. We're going to spin up basically an employee or a human resources sort of employee 360 data hub. And we're going to orchestrate everything with Mulesoft. So we're going to use Mulesoft and essentially what Vishnu showed with the HTTP REST listeners and the RAML specifications. That's how you actually define your APIs in MarkLogic, is through the use of a spec called RAML. So we're going to define some of those REST endpoints. We're going to use the built-in Mulesoft relational database connector. We're going to use the built-in Mulesoft batch framework to trigger the ingestion of both employee and departmental data. And that's going to be coming in from a MySQL database that's being run right now on an AWS instance. And we're going to put all of that into the MarkLogic Data Hub using the MarkLogic Connector's import docs operation. On egress, so getting data out of our system, so that was kind of the left hand, if you can picture what the demo or the image here. The left hand we just went through. The right hand is the egress. For that, we're going to also be using a RAML REST API endpoint to listen for any calls to get the data out. And so that's going to support MarkLogic's built-in search. It's going to support MarkLogic's capability to run Sparkle and semantics queries. And for extra credit, we're also going to trigger the export of the data from our data hub framework into an Amazon S3 bucket through the Amazon S3 connector that Mulesoft offers. And then in between, we're actually going to trigger also harmonization using Mulesoft. And once again, that'll all be over REST. So what are our demo requirements? We need to ingest employee and departmental history data in from our MySQL, provide a single view of departmental history for any given employee. So we're going to be really looking at what departments over time an employee has worked in. We're going to allow for the searchable access. We're going to need to export that data to S3, like I mentioned, support for Sparkle, graph-based views, and querying of that history data with Sparkle. We're going to, an important theme with Data Hub Framework is provenance and lineage. So we're actually going to show the origins and lineage of the data coming into our system. And it's also important to note that our IT department requires triggering this with Mulesoft. So we're going to trigger this all with Mulesoft and REST services. And for right now, it's going to be manual. Very much in an enterprise system, we'd be able to automate this and have those systems kind of control how that works. Okay, so here's our demo system architecture. At left, we have our MySQL data, and so these are the employees and departments tables coming in. I don't know how well this will show in the back, but notice this underscore case of the columns coming in. For departments, for instance, we have department number, department name, and for employees, we have emp underscore no for employee number and things like that. I'm going to show you a little trick of what I do here later on with my ingest flow. We're going to load that data in more or less as is, and this is my trick, and the asterisk I'll apply later. Of course, we have our MarkLogic Data Hub in the middle. And it's important to note, this can run, the Mulesoft connector will work with either the MarkLogic Data Hub service It'll work with any data hub installation you have. As long as the connector can talk to MarkLogic in any sort of deployment infrastructure, you're good to go. We're going to have our harmonization, of course, and so that's going to be our logic inside of MarkLogic to actually marry together those employee data with the department data to provide our employee 360. And then we're going to have our search, Sparkle, and then the export to S3. So as I mentioned, we're going to use Mulesoft to trigger and orchestrate each phase of the data movement here. And I've gotten the question, why is that important? And so we're seeing it increasingly in the field, especially in really large customer, enterprise system integrations. Obviously, if you can automate something, let's automate it. Traditionally, very often when we're working with the data hub framework, we might be using, very manual processes. And so we're seeing that the use of Mulesoft is actually a great way to help automate, getting data in, triggering that harmonization, very importantly, and then getting the data out. And how would we do that, though? So it involves listening for data changes in requests, simultaneously from any of our many systems here. And kind of also checking with MarkLogic periodically throughout the process to see, is our ingest done? Are we ready to harmonize? So that's sort of the functionality we're going to be building up for upcoming versions. So for ingest here, like I said, we're going to use the built-in Mulesoft database connector. They have other great connectors as well that we could use. So if you imagine at left, especially with an HR sort of demo here, they even have a PeopleSoft connector. So if we had a PeopleSoft system running here, we'd be able to use the PeopleSoft connector to get data in here. But you can listen to file systems, you can listen to message queues, pick things up automatically and ingest it. So once our data is in our staging area, we're going to kick off harmonization with it and determine when the flow is ready to run. And then from there, we'll be able to run our egress. We'll even use Mulesoft to be able to do that. So with that, I will, and this is where I may need your help again, Vishnu.
More of the presentation.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. So Vishnu showed you quite a bit about Anypoint Studio, talked to you about the underlying Mule runtime environment as well. This is our first flow. This is our ingest flow. And you'll notice across the top that I have 3 different flows going on here. There's an ingress, a harmonize, and an egress. So I'll start with the ingestion. I've set up my HTTP listener with our RAML spec that I defined. And that's going to allow us to send in dynamic request parameters, variables to trigger off different ingestions of our employee data as well as our department data. This is the built-in database connector that Mulesoft ships with. And so this is what's talking to our MySQL instance. It's displaying an error message right now because I'm doing things dynamically based on those request parameters. So please ignore that for right now. And this is my asterisk I mentioned. We talk about loading data as is. That works really well. It's also better if we can go ahead and get a sense of our provenance and lineage data, and that's exactly what I've done here. So I'm using the transform operation that Vishnu showed. And this, to be a little bit more specific about it, there's a great transformation language, a domain-specific language called DataWeave. And that's exactly what I'm using here. So we're bringing in basically our employee table and our department table, but we're just doing a slight transformation on it first. And really what I'm doing here is just adding in some of my lineage data. I'm saying that it's coming in from MySQL. what the Data Hub framework entity that I'm running against, what have you. And then this bit of logic down here is just basically where I'm bringing in the data as is, except that I'm transforming that underscore case, the emp underscore no and the dept underscore no, into using a more JSON-friendly lower camel case notation. And so all of these functions are actually built into DataWeave. It's extremely powerful and a really great language. Also, FYI, when you first get into MuleSoft, chances are you're not going to be writing this. Over to the left here, there's this really incredible ability to do data mapping. So if you put in a source JSON or XML data model that you want to target, it'll actually allow you to kind of drag and drop connections between them and automatically configure this transformation. So after all of that, we're going to put it into MarkLogic. This is our import doc operation. It has our MarkLogic connection information. Let's see here. So this is very standard if you've used MLCP or Gradle or any of those to connect. Username, password. There's some general connection parameters. Here's where we're working with Data Hub Framework. So the way we do that, of course, is that the beauty of working with Data Hub Framework is that you just work with transform parameters inside of MarkLogic. And so by expressing this server transform ML SJS input flow, we can actually work with our server-side JavaScript input flows to get the data into our envelope model inside of a Data Hub Framework. And then we can assign things like our DMSDK job name. Okay, so, and then finally we're going to, basically run the job here and then output just some metadata about the job itself. Okay, so I'm going to switch over briefly to a REST desktop client that I use. So I'm going to trigger all of the work here manually with my REST desktop client. It's a really great tool called Insomnia. Check it out if you can. So the first thing we're going to do is trigger our employee ingest. So we're going to send that. While we're doing that, I'm going to follow along in the console here. So it's actually going to show our progress here. We're ingesting 1,000 records in from MySQL, and I'm going to do the same thing for the department information. We immediately get a response back from MuleSoft showing that we're ingesting 1,000 records. Sorry about the size of that. It might be a little small to read, but we're bringing those in. And then similarly for our departments. We get back our information here inside of the console. Shows that we were successful in our ingest of 1,000 records. And we can now switch over to those of you who have used Query Console with MarkLogic. You can actually go see now that we have our employee data. That's there. We can also do our department data, and that's there. So inside of that data, you can see where we've inserted provenance, and then we have kind of our core data that came in as well. I'll show the same for employees real quick. And then I'm going to have to get onto the other phases here. So employees, similarly here. Right now, our provenance information is not in an ideal spot, and that's going to be part of our harmonization process. So here is the employee record that we brought in, and there was our provenance information. So now I'm going to trigger our harmonization process, and then I'll walk you through that. So here's the query we're going to use to trigger the harmonization process. Send that through. Take a few seconds there. Let me come on over to explain a little bit about it. So harmonize, we can do entirely with HTTP. We will be looking at getting this probably into a single operation, but we can do this purely with out-of-the-box MuleSoft HTTP operations. So If any of you have run a hub flow before, basically it's collect your URIs, run the harmonization, and send it through over into MarkLogic. And so Mulesoft triggers all of that for us. I'll switch over to our final database. And there we go. Here's our harmonized record. We have our provenance information and our lineage moved up where traditionally we like to store it more in our headers. So we have that in there. We also have some enrichment that I did in the data to add RDF triples to give us that graph, traversal, navigation, query ability. And then we have our instance data. And so now you can see that this instance data actually has quite a bit more to it. It has our employee information, and then we get our department information as well. So we can see that this employee in the past worked in the production department. And then finally, we can query that. I'm going to send a Sparkle query just to prove that we got some triples and some Sparkle query graph navigation out. It's formatted out as a CSV. It's a nice feature of MarkLogic. You can do Sparkle queries and get CSV outputs. We also have our traditional search API, so we can search and get all of our data back. So this is a search API response from MarkLogic built in. But now we want to do that final piece. We want to trigger our search and then also get back our documents in S3 for downstream. So part of our query for doing this, I'm going to send in a structured query. And this is our structured query to get data out of MarkLogic. We're going to run a query against the element called employee department name. And we're specifically going to find people who are in human resources. The RAML for the flow for this, we're going to hit again a RAML endpoint. We're going to query our MarkLogic database, get the results back. And then here, for each record, we're going to send it into S3. We're also going to send a response back on the HTTP response payload. And then finally, that would be it. So now we can trigger that. We'll send this. So we'll be getting back a response of all of the documents of employees who work in human resources. And so there's our HTTP response. But now if I toggle over to this tool that I use to monitor my S3 bucket, and I hit refresh, I'll actually see the JSONs of the data that we got back from our query. So this is the version of those documents as now being sent on to my S3 bucket. And so with that, that's the demo of the connector. So back to Enrique.
So what I'm gonna do now is show you how to visualize those triples. No, I'm kidding. Key takeaways from this presentation. First of all, number one, we're a partner with Mulesoft. We developed the initial version of a connector that's certified. It's available for you guys to use. And more importantly, we have a roadmap where we're about to come out with a second version of a connector that allows you to query data from MarkLogic, and we have a roadmap for greatly enhancing that. So as we move forward, we're going to be doing more and more with Mulesoft. That results in, leveraging both the power of MarkLogic from a data integration perspective and really accelerating the time it takes to actually get those data sources into MarkLogic. So these are great capabilities. We're really excited about that. I don't know, Ed, if we're going to have time to do some questions?
Yeah, we have a few minutes, so we have time for maybe one or two questions. Does anybody have a question? I know you've probably asked a lot of questions thus far outside in the sponsor area, but last call for questions? Okay, well, thank you very much to Mulesoft and to Clay and Enrique for presenting. If you would, show them a round of applause.